And we are live. Thank you for joining at noon 12 Eastern. Usually you would be here to see our show called the Saturday Morning D&D Show with me and Jordan. I'm Sir Lucian from Sir Lucian Gaming, and Jordan is currently playing a charity stream game, which is super cool, and he's getting to play with some other great content creators, but we thought we'd move our show because we didn't want to not have a Saturday morning show. So we're going to move it to the 1 p.m. slot. If you're going to be able to make that, great. Stick around. But we thought, hey, lots of people have been coming around at 12 p.m. and maybe they'd want to see something instead of nothing. So I asked a friend of mine, PB Plays Inside, to come in, and we decided to create a whole show, not just like one little thing. But so she's here with us, and this is our new show called The Standard Array. And what's cool about this show is it's our tagline is we're not going to min-max you to death in this show. So this is about Standard Array. When I was thinking about it, is that set of stats you get in Dungeons and Dragons to help you kind of quick start your character. So you don't have to worry about rolling. You don't have to worry about agonizing over point buy like me and PB do constantly. It just gives you a set. You use them and you go. So I thought the show is kind of going to be a lot like that. We're going to give you information. We're going to help you with tools that are just going to help you make some quick decisions, and you can just move on without having to dive too deep in. So I think we're going to cover all kinds of role-playing games, not just Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to probably have this at a different time. It won't normally be a Saturday morning show, but we thought we would put it in as filler today to accommodate all those fans coming in to watch a 12 p.m. Eastern show. So let me introduce my co-host, PB Plays Inside. She has a YouTube channel. She has branched out into streaming recently. PB, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Hello, everyone.
Awesome.
PB.
She lots of cool videos. She's been doing character creation videos lately. She's been doing streaming of games, kind of diving into other D&D areas or role-playing game areas, and we're going to see quite a bit of that throughout the show. But today's show is we decided to kick it off. The inaugural show is we wanted to talk a little bit about how to play test beta material or playtest material that gets released. So if you're coming at it from a Dungeons and Dragons angle, which we thought today's session would be Dungeons and Dragons heavy, though the show format doesn't mean we have to kind of stay to that. But for today, that kind of means like when you see stuff that comes out on Unearthed Arcana, or you go over to the DM's Guild, or you go over to Drive Through RPG, and you find these things that are player-made or third-party, other companies, OSDR, OD, I always forget the acronym, the common open license rules. You know, a lot of people will be able to release stuff on that. Or if you just have a DM that has custom classes, custom races, custom whatever it might be, custom game, custom genre, how would you play test those in your setting? So those are some of the things we're going to cover today. We're going to keep an eye on chat where we can. If you have questions, you can go ahead and ask them. If we're looking away from the camera or from each other, that's probably what we're doing, is we're checking our cams out. We see Sky Blue Mist made it again. He was on. If you wanted to see something super funny, was our test stream last night where we just rambled on for about 2 hours before my system crashed. But Sky Blue was there with us, along with Jordan stopped by and MC Colonel and all them. A whole bunch of fans kind of jumped in, so that was fun. So feel free to interact with the show. We'll keep an eye on it. Feel free to tweet it out. You can catch us or more information about these shows or other shows like it from our channels at our Twitter, which is mine is at Sir Lucian Gaming. So that's Lucien. A lot of people have trouble spelling Lucian, all one word. And then for PB, it's at PB Plays Inside. One of her many Twitter handles. She might tell you more later on. Who knows? So where do we want to start, PB? Where do we want to dive in? I know we've got our little list here. We've got a whole bunch of stuff we can talk about. Where do we want to start with? Where do your notes tell you?
Let's see, probably the easiest thing and the shortest thing, which would probably be how to playtest a new race in a system.
All right. Yeah, let's dive into that. So let's talk about some examples. So what are some examples that we have found? I know we were looking around over the past week, and me and you have probably even played a few of these in other games. Give us some examples of what we're talking about.
Let's see. Well, we have things such as the Unearthed Arcana with D&D, which is the one I think we're both acquainted with the most. We have D&D has done a very Wizards has done a very interesting job of shifting, having two kinds of new different races. They have sub races and they have actual new races. So we have things such as the Warforged, the Shifter, the Changeling over in D&D. All of those coincidentally came out with the Eberron expansion. And we have the
Right.
Minotaur. We have the Gith. We have just the Gith because I believe there are two sub races to that one. And then we have a variation on elves and tieflings so far as what we've seen. Both with different things, which I found very, very interesting. The elf sub races are like totally different, and then some of the tiefling variations are just a literal variation.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think when they release a race or a sub race, the thing to keep in mind when when you're adding it to the game is usually they come with obviously the fluff or the background to it, the narrative story, and that's usually covering some gap that they think they have in the campaign. So if you create a sun elf race or you create a new type of fiendish tiefling, it's kind of covering maybe something that wasn't in the player's handbook to start with, or one of the expansions like a Volos or a Xanathars or whatever else that you might have supplement wise. But I think the thing that's interesting about it is sometimes they come with a mechanical change, right? So they come with something that you get right from first level, and it's something that you have that's going to go right up to 20th level. So unlike classes where things come in at maybe second or third, or at different intervals, 5, 7, and whatever, or however the class works, this is something that you have right from the beginning. So I think when you're playtesting these, or you're letting them in your campaign, you're thinking about allowing it, or you just want to test it to give feedback to Dungeons and Dragons. So you want to send it back to Wizards of the Coast and say, hey, we play test this. We think it's overpowered. We think it's underpowered. We think it doesn't fit with the theme. They like all that feedback. They read all that feedback. Keep in mind that that's one of the things I look at is how does it balance, because it's something you get right from the beginning versus. So let's take one that's already in the game that we know pretty well. I mean, we know tieflings pretty well. We both have played tieflings in campaigns, and when we're looking at tieflings, like when you start out, you get some pretty interesting things as a tiefling right away, right? So, yeah. You start out with thaumaturgy right off,
Yep,
so it's like having a cantrip. Yeah, you start with a cantrip, and that could be, I still could be a fighter, I still could be a barbarian, I still could be, whatever the class is that I might be, I have a spell, a cantrip, which is interesting, and I'm going to have that thaumaturgy throughout my whole playing of that. Then they have stuff where you get it at a different level, like Hellish Rebuke comes in at, is it second or third? Third. Yeah, so this class or this race introduces things that you get only at certain levels, and then...
Oh, second.
Is it second?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a second level spell, you get it at third level.
There you go. Yeah. So it's interesting. So when we're looking at new races that come in, so now if we take one of these ones that came in from like Unearthed Arcana, we had a whole bunch of them. So let's take a look at or some like one of the fiendish options out of the Unearthed Arcana. Do you have that up? I'm gonna grab mine and bring it up. I forgot to bring that one up.
See. So
I put it in Discord.
Yeah. We have the sub race, the tiefling sub races for the fiendish options, because they're two different traits, but I think this will make more sense. This one is tied off of the Infernal Legacy traits, sort of, where in the Infernal Legacy traits, you are a descendant from one of the Lords of the Nine Hells or something along those lines. So you're connected to a diabolical being, a very real person. So you could be attached to Asmodeus. You could be with Levistus or Mephistopheles.
Yeah, lots of hard ones to name.
Yep. And they have, I think this is the best example of a subrace change that's just minor,
Mm-hmm.
but has great flavor.
Yeah, yeah. I think this one represents the idea of a narrative, filling a narrative hole or narrative gap, or to expand what you're doing with that. Because if you look at them, let's say if we go with Mephistopheles, just because it's cool to say, right? You get your ability score increases, charisma score increased by 2, intelligence increased by 1. So no other mechanical event. You're not getting other stuff there, but then it talks about maybe what signature spells they might have if you're going to follow those cults, so you can kind of flavor your way towards that kind of stuff. What the typical cultist might look like or be, their goals, in case you're playing, like a warlock or somebody of this kind of thing, because a lot of people with tieflings will play a warlock or a caster of some sort. It's a charisma based casting kind of thing. Not that you have to. That's just one of the ways it gets played. So it's interesting, but it's not going to break a game. Like if you get 2 increase to charisma and a 1 to intelligence, you're not talking about groundbreaking things. So this is a good example, I think, of just you can play test it. It adds good flavor. It adds more options for the narrative, but definitely is probably not going to break the mechanics.
Mm-hmm. And this is actually one of the great examples of wizards putting out flavor, almost the flavor text sub races, and then also giving you more information on them, sort of like you were talking about before. On that same UA page, we get diabolical cults, which just tells you, this is probably what the cult of Beelzebub wants. This is sort of how they are, and these are sort of their spells. So that's a great example of like tying those two in to be able to create a one shot or be able to create a short campaign, where you're able to really get into some of those changes to see, is this OP, is this not OP?
Yeah. And like if we move on to one that might have more of a game effect, if we move over to look at some of those elf sub races, we see a little bit more mechanics are being introduced for some of these sub races, and you have to take into consideration. It's not that we haven't had classes that or races that have had some of these things. So like if we go over and we take a look at the elf sub race Averell, where you actually get wings, right? So you get flight. Flight's a big deal starting at first level. If you guys were listening last week with Jordan was talking about running a fairly high level dungeon with his group, and they were able to just cast fly and kind of circumvent many of the things that might have made that dungeon hard for those that couldn't fly. And so now if you just all of a sudden give characters fly at first level, I know we have Aarakocra, we're already able to fly, and some of the other ones have the ability. I think Air Genasi could probably levitate. I don't know if they could fly though. I think they can levitate. So you got to be a little careful with that's big. In fact, as a side note, when we started our Storm King's Thunder campaign, and I put out there you could play any of the UA races just so people could have fun, we did have an original player decide they would like to play an Aarakocra. And my first thought of that was, oh, that's awesome. I like the race. I like the idea of bringing in an eagle-type person or a bird-type person. But then immediately as a DM, I had to sit back and go, okay, now wait a minute. We're about to do this first adventure, and all of a sudden I have a character that can just fly all over the battlefield, right? And it was like, oh, wait a minute, that's gonna change some stuff, right? I got to be a little careful here. And what are the mechanics? What are the things that I need to think about? Sky Blue's kind of mentioning it there a little bit too. Like, I had to warn the player that I was going to be a little ruthless when it came to a flying creature. So if a flying creature goes over and I've got some bad guys, they're going to try to shoot him down. And guess what? When you get shot down and you fall over 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, that's a lot of damage. So flying can mean falling, and falling can mean death, right? So you got to be a little careful. So I tried to warn her as she was playing that, because yes, it's going to give her a big advantage, but I also wanted her to feel it was going to be very dangerous too, to offset that advantage. So that's something to keep in mind, but that's not like the other one. So this one, like what other one you want to talk about? What's another one that maybe has some game changing things to keep in mind?
Some game changing things to keep in. Oh, the Shardar Kai.
Yeah, that's a good.
The Shardar Kai. When we were talking about this last night, I thought this was so OP. I think anything that gives you teleportation, um, just all willy-nilly,
Yeah,
even if it's
first
just once per
level, doesn't
short
matter what
rest, that's
class.
crazy.
Yeah.
Like, it's great flavor text and all of that because, it's Raven Queen, Shadowfell, that's sort of a thing there. But I just think that's so OP. There's another one that does something similar, and I think that's crazy to have it on a
Yeah,
short
yeah.
rest.
So the Shadar Kai, that's why we think. I love the actual thing for this from the UA. So it's sworn to the Raven Queen service. The mysterious Shadar Kai venture into the material plane from the Shadowfell to advance her will. So you're looking at ability score of charisma score increased by 1. Not too big a deal. But cantrip, one of the following cantrips of your choice. You get Chill Touch, Spare the Dying, Thaumaturgy, and Charisma is your spell casting ability for it. So that's something to keep in mind for power builders, min maxers who are going to take something like that and gear it up with a warlock build or a barbarian build or a fighter build or ranger build. All these ones that maybe don't have access to cantrips, and all of a sudden first level you have it. And then on top of that, I'm going to give you that spell. Thaumaturgy can be very useful. Chill Touch, Spare the Dying can save your party. You can, if you're good and you think about it, you can stop a lot of death saves and stuff for your party, which is really good. But then you get to Bless of the Raven Queen. As a bonus action, you can magically teleport up to 15 feet to an unoccupied space you can see, and you gain resistance to all damage until the start of your turn. So everything's halved at that point when you get hit when you come out of that teleportation. That's huge. That makes me want to play a Shadar Kai. And I don't want to play an elf. I'm like, no elves. Everybody plays elves. I don't want to play an elf. So that's a very interesting thing. So I think that's a good point of keeping an eye on playtest material, keeping an eye on how it affects your campaign. Here's the thing that would be my tip to the GMs. It's okay if you introduce playtest material into your campaign, as long as you tell your players, right? So up front, you're talking and saying, we're going to allow this in, and set the example or set the premise that if we feel like it's just too much, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about it again. So we're going to let it go for a few sessions. We're going to see how it goes. But if at some point it feels like it's a little much, I want to have another group conversation where we say, do we tone it down? Do we not accept it? Do we make a change here? Or do we run with it? How do we go? Because I think I was listening to several different DMs throughout the week. Mike Merles, Chris Perkins, Matt Colville, Adam Coble, all these guys that I like to go out and watch and learn how they play the games. One of the big things they were saying is it's not necessarily up to the DM or the GM to be the sole arbiter of rule changing, right? This is a group game, so we're playing with each other. Bring in your players to help you with rule changes or rule adjustments in your campaign. Bring them in so that everybody's on the same page. Everybody gets to kind of agree to what they think is fun. It still has the flavor they want, but maybe doesn't have as much of advantage, or maybe needs more advantage. Maybe it wasn't as neat as it was supposed to be, and you want to boost it a little bit. But if you get everybody always talks about, player buy-in, then moving forward, we're changing the rules for our game together, and it's not just the GM or the DM saying, here's the rule change, you all have to accept it type thing. So you just keep that in mind. Want to keep going on races now, or do we want to switch?
Yeah, we should switch over next to classes.
Now that's a big one, because if you were to go back, say, for Dungeons and Dragons Unearthed Arcana, I think we found 4 articles maybe referencing races, sub-races, and not as many for sure. Although in Volos you do get added monster races came in with Volos, so that became official material, no longer playtest material at that point. Although I don't even think they released playtest material for like, hey, you could be a hobgoblin or you could be this or that. That just was real stuff.
That just came out. Yeah.
But classes, you go through Unearthed Arcana and you're going to find more than 20 different articles. You're going to find some articles that have been gone twice. So like they've done more more run-throughs of several classes like Mystic, Artificer, those kinds of ones.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we want to go on classes? Let's tackle that now.
Well, let's start off with the easy one with just the archetypes. So archetypes
Yes.
starting at level 3. It gives you a little bit of time to work up to them and give you time to think about it.
Right.
If you're starting a campaign at 1, or if you're starting at 3, you really have to think about it. We've done a few archetypes. We've done a few UA free ones. So I know I've played the Phoenix Soul Sorcerer before.
Mm-hmm.
You've played what is it called?
The Hexblade Warlock, although it came out with
Hexblade
Xanathar, but it definitely was a UA article first.
Mm-hmm.
And it slightly changed. Some of you may not know that, but if you look at the playtest rules and the version that came out in Xanathar's Guide of Everything, they did make slight adjustments for some of those classes. So even though they did a playtest and the way the class looked one way, they have made adjustments before it actually went to a live, real class that you can use.
And
a War Mage was the other one.
Yep. Oh yeah, War Mage was another one.
Yep.
And when we said that classes and subraces gave you a lot of opportunity for flavor text and a lot of ability to change how your campaign runs or where your campaign runs, archetypes do that to the nth degree, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Much more impact on the game, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, I remember I was thinking up trying to do a storm sorcerer. I thought that was so cool to just have a sorcerer that was based solely on storm things, thunder, lightning, control, weather, or whatever. And I was having a little bit of a hard time finding spells, finding just like a base character to be able to do that with. You can do it. It's just, it's a lot of imagination and a lot of just you rewording things, retexturing things, I guess. But then the UA came out and they started doing things like Storm Sorcerer, though that was a little bit more in the Princess of Apocalypse. But they had the Phoenix Sorcerer, which is all about fire.
Yeah.
It even gives them a special fire property that was an interesting thing to playtest, how that would work. Because on paper, it could go either way. It could be very OP or it could be underpowered.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting too, like you kind of bring that up. A lot of times when we would create characters, say in our campaigns that we played, and we weren't using, say, Unearthed Arcana, or we weren't using some of the playtest material, what we would do is we would pick a class and a archetype, a subclass, that gave us close to the stuff we wanted, but then we would retexture what it looked like. So the mechanics in the background were the same, but instead of it being my firebolt looks like everybody's firebolt, my firebolt looks like a spinning disc of something, of fire or light or whatever. And so we would just change the flavor of how pieces look or how the magic looks or how the ability looks, even though we wouldn't change the mechanic because we wanted to stay with what the thing was. But then a lot of the UA articles started coming out, especially last year. They just started dumping a lot of character class articles on us. And it was starting to then allow us to say, oh, I no longer just have to reflavor the text. I no longer have to, like if I want to make a Iron Man or a Wolverine, or I want to make a Dota character, or I want to make a League of Legends character, I could do it with some of these subclasses that are coming out because they're getting closer to having lots of different types of characters to choose from. In fact, the number of classes and archetypes that are out there is pretty daunting at the moment, especially probably for a new person who, if you open that book and you had all that stuff in front of you, that's a lot of stuff to take into. And there's still more coming. Like not released yet would be like the Mystic or the Artificer. So they're still running testing on those. They've run 2 different tests on Mystic, and there'll probably be a 3rd test at this point because they still feel like they haven't got it. I was listening to reading articles and listening to some of the interviews and stuff, and they just feel like that is still not where they want it, and yet they want to bring it in. So the psionics of the older editions bringing it into 5th edition, but they haven't nailed it down quite yet. So I think what are the things that people should keep in mind when they're going to play test classes and archetypes?
Make sure to read all of it. It's very easy to just skip over sentences, think that that's just flavor text. I don't need to read that part. But you should read all of it. Make sure you know how things and what the wording is, because the great thing about D&D 5e is that there's a lot of ambiguous wording in it. I know in the past week I've seen so much talk and chatter over on Jeremy Crawford's Twitter about the Hexblade, and how that hex works in particular. And there was a point where he was just like, I mean, it's up to the DM at certain points because it is ambiguous for a reason, that wording.
Yeah.
So make sure you know the wording both as a DM and the player, but it is the player's responsibility to know how it's worded. Also, have in mind with your DM how you want to play this character. If you guys want to try and break it to see if you want to min-max it, let your DM know, hey, this is what I'm doing. And see if they're okay with it. And if that's the type of thing you're trying to do, you're running a one-shot where you're just rotating players to play a UA character to see, hey, how OP or underpowered is this? You can try it out that way.
Yeah. We had the Mystic being played in our a homebrew campaign that we were playing, and that one was very interesting because I think the one issue that we ran into a little bit is that I barely, as the DM running it, I read through it once, but I didn't really dive into it. And I think the player did about the same. So we both were trying to play it through a campaign, and there was a lot of trying to figure out what's going on during the sessions with, like you said, the wording or how this mechanic works. When can they do things? How often can they do things? What can they affect? What's not affected by those things? Mystic was a really big one for us, and be ready for that to slow the pace of the game down a little bit, right? If you're going to allow that type of material and you want to play test that type of material, you got to give it that time. You got to give it that discussion time so that you and the players can say, what's the intent? Because you always see a lot of people asking, like you just mentioned, they'll ask Jeremy Crawford a lot. They'll say, I always see, what is it? RAI and RAW. Right, so they'll say, what is raw and what is RAI? And I kept thinking, what in the world are they talking about? But they're talking about rule as written versus the rule as intended, right? Because sometimes they can make an intention, but the way it's written doesn't actually portray that, or people don't interpret it that way, so it actually gets used in a different way. So, there's a chat there from, okay. Yeah, gotcha. And so the one thing you want to keep in mind when doing that is you got to give it time to breathe. You got to give it time to exist. And with any play testing material, with anything that you're going to allow into your games, whether you're a DM, GM, and really the stuff we're talking about can transcend to other games besides Dungeons and Dragons, is think about the feedback that you're going to give and be ready to look at those items from a narrative aspect, a mechanics aspect, and then just a min-maxing aspect. Those are the three that they're looking for feedback from. So like the first one, when you're talking about narrative, and we're already talking about classes and races, how does it affect the narrative? Does it cover gaps? Does it feel right? Does the things you've given it, like if you say, I'm going to create a Minotaur race, and then they come out with the rule that says, all right, you get +2 to intelligence, or +2 to dexterity, or +2 to wisdom. People might say, I don't know, does that fit in the feel of the race? Is that where that narrative should go? Is that how we're kind of defining that group? Does it fit some way, or does it not feel right? I've heard them say that on a few of their interviews where they talk about something didn't quite feel right. I'll give you an example. I believe in Hexblade, the original playtest of Hexblade, you got a Shadow Mastiff, as a pet at like 6th level or something. And they felt, and I remember them saying that they got a bunch of feedback that it didn't match the feel of the Hexblade. So those are the types of feedback that they're looking for. And then they're looking for mechanical feedback, right? So that you have in the game, in a normal course of a game, while you're narratively playing, while you're skill checking, while you're in combat, how does it play? How does it feel? How does it fit in with the other classes or races or other mechanics that are going on? And does it fit easy? Is it too much overhead? Is it is the rule written simply enough? Is the rule too vague so that there's a lot of problems and there's a lot of questions during session? So all those things are what you're trying to get feedback on. And then the last thing again is, what happens if you really try to min-max it? What if you try to break it, almost like if I paired this race up with this class combination during this type of narrative campaign, I'm a demigod, I'm not actually I'm way above a player or something. So those are things to keep in mind when you're given feedback for those types of things. And so classes and races, I really think they're trying to cover a narrative gap to start with, and they're giving you at times mechanics to back that up. But they really want to cover a narrative gap. They're trying to say, I'm a monk who has the divine soul, or the drunken master, right? Or I'm the barbarian with the ancestral guardians. So I have spirits of my ancestors protecting me and protecting those of my party. That starts out as a flavor. That starts out as a genre. That starts out as a theme. And then they build the mechanics to kind of back that play up or to try out. So that kind of keeping in mind where they're coming from. So,
and also, I think it's also, so just maybe back it up for a second. It is also the responsibility of the player, if you're playing a long-term campaign and you're allowed to use a UA, and you want to keep your character and keep that class and archetype because it's cool, to not break it. Don't make it OP. If we look at our Storm King's Thunder campaign, I'm running the revised Ranger right now.
Yes.
Which we all know the Ranger is very underpowered and very underwhelming in the regular PHP. So I was very happy to see it, especially with the Beast Companion change. But I just did because I'm not interested in reading that much. I didn't do the Beast Companion. I did the Monster Slayer, I think that's what it is. The other archetype, which significantly less rules, and really not much of a change. I think there was one slight change, but the real one was just a flavor text like you were talking about. And this one was with Primeval Awareness.
Yeah, and that's where so much trouble. Yeah, go.
It is. So for those of you who don't know what Primeval Awareness is where you have the ability as a ranger to detect your favorite enemy. Now the big change with the ranger in the revised Ranger is that how they do favorite enemies. You only get 2 now instead of getting 1 every few levels. You get 1 at a lower level, and then you get a higher level 1. So at 6, you get a chance to have a favorite enemy of a dragon or a giant or anything like that. And below that, you have, beast and stuff like that. Beast undead and all of that.
Almost like a tiered thing. Like, so as a low-level ranger, you only have up to a certain tier of type of creatures that you're an expert on. But then as you get higher, all of a sudden, you could be an expert on something much higher tiered, almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when humanoid is an option in the lower level one, and I chose that one to see how overpowered that would be, because I couldn't believe that they put it in just as humanoid. So, and we found out that that's not the biggest issue with the favorite enemy, because favorite enemy doesn't give you that much. It gives you a plus to hit, but it gives you the opportunity for Primeval Awareness, and that's where it's broken the most.
Yeah. So it almost felt like, we were looking at it from one endpoint, and we thought this could be a problem. This could end up being an issue when we read it through that first time. But what it ended up being in playtest, we found out it was a different issue for sure. Yeah.
that and Natural Explorer, we changed that one immediately. Natural Explorer in the
Yeah.
revised Ranger is you just have the ability to uh, have your favorite terrain be all terrain essentially.
Yeah.
And we decided right off the bat that just didn't sound right. It
Yeah.
didn't sound balanced, so we just took it out and we're just using the one in the regular Ranger,
Yeah.
in the PHB Ranger. So don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to mix and match, especially in a longer campaign like Storm King's Thunder.
Yeah.
I
And,
think
and I
it's
think it's
working
telling
fine.
too is that they haven't released a revised Ranger yet. Just for that fact, just because I think it's still, they've not been able to narrow down the mechanics to the way they want them. And I don't know if they will. I don't know if they will just come out with a sub type of Ranger that tries to leave Ranger the way it is base, but then use the sub to kind of improve it. Because I don't know how they're going to do when they have a player's handbook and it has the Ranger in it, but then you say you can't use that if they come out with a new one. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know what they're going to
That'll
do.
be one heck of an errata to
Yeah.
add on it.
I saw a good question coming out of chat. Is it Low Dinosaur or IO Dinosaur with a capital I? It's one of those. I got the dinosaur part, what the front of that is. But there was a good question where they talked about I developed a class once and it was hard to play test it. And really, he or she was only able to really theory craft it because he didn't have a lot of people to play test it and to get people to play through it. And I think that's the tough part of play testing, because if you say I'm going to play test, let's say Revised Ranger, like we said here with PB's character in the Storm King's Thunder campaign, we've been in that campaign now for a year and several months. She has just hit 7th level. So in reality, we have tested Revised Ranger up to about 7th level at this point. We haven't even really gotten to high level testing of it. And we've been playing pretty solid in the Storm King's Thunder campaign, for a year and a few months. So we're kind of left with theory crafting being kind of the fallback. Now, there was one thing that I've been kind of developing too, and maybe a series that I do on my channel pretty soon, where it's actually a play test series where we take a look at, say, a new class gets released in an Unearthed Arcana, or a new subclass or new archetype or whatever they want to call them. And we say, okay, so I want to run a small session when this character's at 3rd level. We'll do a quick narrative build up where they can, role play it out a little bit, get the feel of the character. We'll have some type of skill check thing going on. We'll have some type of small end battle, get a feel for how it feels. And then we flash forward very quickly. Maybe that takes a half hour. Maybe that takes an hour. We flash forward and we go, okay, now let's look at it at 6th level. We've, all kinds of things have happened narratively in between, but now we're going to focus our camera in, and now here's this new thing. We do a little narrative, we do a little skill checking, we do a little bit of combat again, and then we do it again at, like 10th or level, or, we just find these breaks so that you can go through a session and you can play a character at these various levels to get a feel for how they fit within, say, some standard characters. So, put in a standard cleric with them, put in a standard fighter, a barbarian or something with them, maybe put a bard in there or something, just something that's a pretty standard group that they would be running around with, and really get a feel for it. Because I think if you're going to add it into your campaigns can run for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years before you finally get to the idea, did we fully playtest that? So I think a lot of that will help with not just theory crafting, because the problem with theory crafting, I think, is you're just looking at it on paper, and you're not really getting real world use out of it as much. So I don't know how valuable that, I think has value, but I don't know how much value it has just theory crafting something to say, okay, yeah, we've tested it. So that was a good question from, did he tell us? IO. So yeah, it's IO Dinosaur. He told us.
Dinosaur.
Awesome.
That's what I thought. Great name.
Yeah. And I did like
So-
the one comment there about the Ranger, and he took plants as his favorite enemy. Hated vegetables.
Ranger laughingstock of the PHB, let me tell you. But to go off of that, also when you're running a short campaign or just like a 2-3 shot, mix in, especially with UA, mix in not only just combat situations, but also the in-between combat
Yeah,
situations.
yeah. Yep.
Because that's where we found the issues mostly with Revised Ranger, not even in the combat. In the combat itself, it's very insignificant.
Hmm.
But when it comes to in between getting to the bad guys, that's where it becomes OP. Like the real OP thing about Primeval Awareness is that it doesn't take anything. You just do it, and you can do it as much as you want. There's no limitation to it. So I myself as a player try to limit it to doing it like once only every few hours, once every like what would be a few short rests because I think it's OP to do it just over and over and over again. Not that I won't do it for my advantage when I really need it, especially just to speed up certain scenes. It's really mostly my playmates, my friends who want me to use it all the time at every situation.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
It's
That's
not.
an interesting thing too, because I remember I had a, this was even back in third edition. I was playing a cleric, and I remember I had a cantrip type spell that was like I don't even remember what it was, but it was like I had the ability that I could pray to my god for, it was like a divination spell to give me some guidance, not necessarily tell me what to do, but give me a hint kind of thing was the overall effect of what it was. And we got trapped in some pocket dimension, and there was a puzzle in front of us to solve, and none of us could solve the puzzle. So the same players that play with PV, or at least a couple of them, were like, well, cast that spell and have your god help us out. I'm like, okay, I cast it. He gives us a hint or whatever. We still can't figure it out. And my group's like, cast it again. Give us another hint. So I cast it again, and we get one more hint, and our group still can't figure out what this puzzle is. We don't know what stones go where, or are they supposed to be placed. We just, for whatever reason, we were not smart enough to figure out this puzzle the GM made. And by the third time, they said, well, do it again. I'm like, no. My cleric would not do it again. It's done. It doesn't make sense. And they got so mad because I was like, I'm done. If we can't figure it out, our characters die here. We died in that pocket dimension. They still tell that story to today, and they are bitter and grumble that I would not keep casting that thing over and over and over. So like with Primeval Awareness, it's like you can just, it's like you concentrate for 5 minutes. Is that what it is? Or 10 minutes?
I think like a minute.
Yeah, or a minute. Yeah, yeah. And then you can GPS locate anything. Like you have a satellite image of how many things there are, how far away they are. It is ridiculously powerful, I thought. So we definitely, and I messed with it. I made it so one of the things I did to combat a little bit, because I don't want to take it away. Like it's a cool thing for your class, and it's you got to be very careful when you're going to take something away from a player that they kind of are into. They're kind of like, I kind of like this. So you want to be a little careful. You just don't want to rip it out of their hands and, and send them home crying, that kind of thing. But one of the things I did do was in my head was, if the thing was underground, I felt Primeval Awareness wouldn't pick it up. Right. So we had that instance where you were tracking a giant and its minions and some humans that they had as prisoners, which is how you were tracking them. You were tracking the prisoners into the mountains. They went into the mountains, and then all of a sudden you lost them because they went underground, and you weren't able to track them anymore. So I thought that was a nice little change to still give you that ability, which is kind of cool, but put some limitations on it that make it so you can't necessarily always trust it. So
Another change I was thinking about Primeval Awareness, other than giving it a cooldown timer, because before, if you don't know, Primeval Awareness, you had to take a spell slot. And if you've ever played a ranger, you have none of those.
definitely not enough, yeah.
I think I have 6 at level 7, 2 level 2s, 4 level 1s. So the other thing I was thinking, contractor-led objects, yep. So the other thing I was thinking that just occurred to me now, that's sort of like do almost like not really a survival check, but like how in tune are you with the world at this moment check, to just like roll a die and whatever you get is whatever you get.
Yeah.
And just don't have the DCs be super high. Just make it a 50-50 chance, like DC 10, see if you make it.
Yeah.
sort of deal.
Well, and I think if we were to have defined it narratively how
After the
it
first time.
works, that can help you inform on how you should change the mechanics. Like, because if we could say, I mean, how does it even work? We realize it's magic, right? We have magic. We're playing Dungeons and Dragons, so I get it. But what is happening? What is truly happening? Are you smelling the wind and you're able to track how many different scents there are and how far away that is? Or are you getting some spectral vision? You know, what is the physical thing that's happening to this ranger that allows them to figure that out? And I think if you can come up narratively what that looks like, that could also help you inform on how you do the mechanics of it. You know, then maybe if there's a storm out, it could affect it. If you've had stress or levels of exhaustion, maybe that affects the rangers, like you said, a higher DC or something like that, or even adding a DC. So I think that's a really good example. And thanks for the follow, IO Dinosaur. So I think we really kind of berated on, or it's probably not the word I wanted, but
A D20 every. Why would he make you roll a D20 every time you cast Identify? Because that's a spell slot you're wasting to identify something, right? That's not just something, especially at lower levels, that's not just something you do all willy-nilly.
well, if you do it as a ritual, you can do it every 10 minutes if you want.
Well, in that case, that would make a little bit more sense. Like, I was thinking with the Primeval Awareness, every time after the first time.
Yeah.
Like, in case you pick up the last trail, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there should always
see
be things within the world that obscure it at times, that mess with it, or maybe even give you some false positives here. Not a lot, but enough to make you take it in as information, but also to look at it with a grain of salt. Be like telling your party, hey, this is what I think is going on, but remember, you know, the last time I did this and we had that big storm, I had the numbers all wrong, or I had the distance wrong, or I couldn't quite pinpoint what was going on. So I think they're here. I think we can go that way. Let's go investigate. And it still works out, but it adds a tiny bit of doubt at times so that it's not just overpowered. It's not like, you know, I've got a drone, you know, it's basically the ranger launches a UAV and it just circles around the bad guys, you know, out in the thing. So that's a good example. We talked about Ranger a lot because PB loves Rangers, just so you know. She's played like 2 or 3 of them at this point. So
I've only played 2 of them. Thank you very much. One was melee.
But you have another one planned, I'm sure.
Well, I have a lot of things planned.
So you're going to play a Horizon Walker. You're going to play a Gloom, a Gloom Stalker. Come on.
Not that interested in Gloom Stalker, but yeah, I am a really big fan of Rangers, more rogues. But the last one we want to talk about are how to beta test a new system. So we see them all the time, right, Lucian? We see them all the time on
new
Kickstarter,
games coming out.
Twitter.
Yeah, get it on the beta, get it on the alpha test. Yeah.
And we get emails. I mean, I just got the email the other day to play test or to download the quick start mission for John Carter, the new Modiphius title.
Yeah. Doesn't that sound fun and cool?
Oh, it sounds hella cool, especially once you read it, because it's very similar to Star Trek Adventures, which Modiphius also did. And we also play tested that. We actually play tested that one. Haven't done John Carter. Maybe one day. Yeah.
And to tie it into D&D, before we were in 4th edition, and I wasn't even playing D&D at that point. There was a gap for me. I played a lot of 3rd edition, 3.5. Then I kind of just got out of role-playing for a bit and was just doing computer gaming and other board gaming and stuff, but somehow wasn't doing role-playing. Came back in when they had just released 5th edition. But during that time, during 4th edition, which I missed, they brought out, hey, we're going to start play testing, you know, D&D 5th edition. I believe they called it D&D Next. And that was how they were doing the play testing. So even Dungeons and Dragons has had this, and I'm sure we're in the hot and heavy, super popular time of 5th edition right now. It's taken everything by storm again. It's like the 80s has come back with role playing, but eventually, you know, Wizards of the Coast is going to do a 6th edition, right? And at some point, they're going to have us play test, and so this is kind of what we thought we would end our session on, was play testing. New systems, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons, and this is like the full rule sets, this is like the full game itself, or some of these new games that are coming out. And there's a lot of awesome games out. This is the renaissance, the revival of role-playing games right now. I would say 2016, 2017, and leading into 2018, I think it's exploding at this point. The types of games you can play, the genre of games, the quality of the rule systems, the quality of what's coming on. There's so much out there. So how do we want to tackle this? How do we help our viewers, help our GMs, DMs, players play in a new system or play test a new system? And we can use a lot of our examples from Star Trek Adventures, which we did recently.
Yeah. So I would say know what a character can do. You don't necessarily have to know how to do it, just know what they can do. So for example, in Star Trek, a lot of people have watched Star Trek. But a lot of people know, like, hey, there's this the Vulcan grip. There's this certain class that does this thing, and this class or this type of race can read minds, and all these sort of different things you can do in Star Trek, and monsters that exist in the Star Trek universe. So in that case, you're able, and it's just a great example for Star Trek, to be able to look in and be like, hey, can I do this? Can I shoot a phaser? Can I stun somebody? And then look for those answers in there and be like, okay, I understand what I can do. Don't know how to do it yet, but I know I can do it. Yeah. And the same thing with, and I would say with anything, like, how do I attack? What else can I do during combat? And I think that's because once you understand how to do combat, I feel like everything else just becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like the way I was kind of thinking of it too. I kind of wrote this down because I wanted to come up with a quick. I'm streaming games. I'm gathering my friends to come together and play games, and I want to play lots of different games. And what I realized is I'm reading Numenera Cipher System. I'm reading Modifius's games. I'm reading Macho Women with Guns. I'm reading, Monster Hunter International role-playing game. All these different games, all these different systems. That's based on the hero system. How do I learn this quick enough that I can say, hey guys, let's get together on a Friday and play the one-shot of this? And not only is it new to me, but I got to help them learn it. And that's the same thing that happens with a playtest, right? So I kind of thought down, what are the basic elements of learning a game, or which at least, because you don't need to know all of the stuff. If you're going to do a playtest of a new game, keep it simple, keep it contained, and build a one-shot adventure that leads you through these different things. As an example, when we played Star Trek Adventures, they gave us the mission that they had in the very first playtest rule set was Rescue at Xerxes 4. It was, here's a nice RP scene with your ensigns in a shuttlecraft. Have it answer to a distress call if they wish. All players want to answer a distress call, so they have them fly in. Put a complication in for them landing the shuttlecraft. The reason you put that scene in is because you want to teach and you want to play test doing a skill check, because every game has a non-combat check of some sort for the most part when you're dealing with things that are not combat related, whether this is knowing lore, piloting something, investigating something, building something. There's always these little checks. So start off with that. So there's a scene meant for all of us to learn how to do a skill check, how to look at our character sheet, how to put in what the skill is, how to figure out the difficulty setting or what the number is, and the mechanics of that piece. That's a big piece, because in gaming you have RP, you have skill checking, and that could be, the name might be different. It might be called abilities in the game. It might be called powers in the game. It might be called whatever it is. I'm using the word skill as kind of a catch-all. And then you have the combat, which is the conflict resolution, right? There's some type of conflict and you need to resolve it. And so if you're looking at it for that perspective, skill check is like physical and investigative. Combat, build a scene in that has ranged combat, build a scene in that has melee combat. Separate it out a little bit so that you can work through the mechanics of each of those before you bring them together, right? If it has magic special rules, build a scene that's meant for that. If it has tech rules because you're playing Shadowrun or something and you need to do your, what is it you're playing? You're playing a hacker that has a deck, right? And that's a whole nother set of mechanics that are different than anything else in the game. Build a scene for it so you can try it out. Resource mechanic of some option or world genre where you're building a world piece or you're pretending that. A good example of that is if you're playing Dungeon World and you're during character creation, you're tying your characters together, you're narrating what the world is. All elves have wings, or all elves come from the swamp, or all trolls are actually small little guys, with really fluffy hair. They're not the big ones under the bridges, whatever it is. So all of those things, I think, is what you're trying to do inside your game when you're going to play test. So have a small scenario that details out each one of those items, then sit down with your players and say, hey, here's this, your ship's flying along and all of a sudden you're having engine trouble. Hey, pilot, how about you make some type of check to see if you can help that out? We all learn those mechanics. We all move on. They can be used again later on. Great. Now let's get into a combat. Let's do this and that. So I think that's really a really great way to kind of play test that. The only other thing I would say, separate playtesting of a session and the main rules from character creation. Because I think the character creation rules need to be taken on their own, right? That's its own little session. That's session 0. And when you do character creation and you're testing that, it helps inform you on the game you're playing, right? It helps tell you where the things that are important, helps tell you the type of game. Is it skill heavy? Is it ability heavy? Is it stat heavy? Is it dice rolling heavy? Is it narrative heavy? Whatever it might be, you're going to learn that in the character creation portion of the testing. So I think keep those separate. Use pre-built characters for testing mechanics and storyline, and then keep the character creation separate. Don't get too bogged down. That'd be my advice. Well, we're getting close to the end of our first. Me and PB, as you know, if you were around last night, could talk for 2 hours, and had my computer not crashed, we might have went for 3 or 4 hours. But we're getting close to the end of our show. How do we wrap it up, PB? I talk a lot, so how about you wrap it up for us?
Well, thank you guys for watching The Standard Way. We have a list of things we want to talk about, but we're always open to more topics. If there's anything you'd like to hear us talk about, feel free to tell us over on Twitter, respectively at PB Plays Inside and at Sir Lucian Gaming. Sir Lucian Gaming.
Yep.
That's what happens when you don't have a standard name for all your social media.
That is true. Yeah, it's all a little bit different.
So, follow us there. We also have YouTube where you could watch VODs such as this. Sir Lucian at youtube.com/Sir Lucian and me at PB Plays Inside.
And we'll probably put this up as a video. We'll probably put it on Twitter where we're going to put it, but it might go on my channel. It might go on PB's channel. Maybe we stream it on mine and PB then puts it up on her YouTube. We'll play around with what we want to do. This is the first show. There's probably be setting changes, format changes, schedule changes as we get this rolling. But we're glad you guys joined us for our inaugural session, and hopefully pretty quick here we'll be getting Jordan on. I'll go check in, see how he's doing, and we might be starting up the Saturday morning D&D show, so you don't want to miss that with me and Jordan coming up. So, PB, thanks for joining for this morning. I can't wait that we do some more the standard array shows. I also thought was really cool is the abbreviation is the TSA. So the standard. So we're your TSA announcement for today. You've just had that on how to play test beta materials. So all of you, you're welcome, and I'm glad you joined. So we'll see you in the next one, and thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
And then we hit some little button here that says end. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.